Hello and welcome to the Lend Hoping Nothing podcast. I'm Michael Humphreys. I'm happy to be talking to you today. This is going to be hopefully a short little episode, or what I used to call them, um, uh, amusing moments. Yeah. Today I want to talk about the article that Dr. Storck wrote in response to mine at Suroeste. Spanish. I'm never going to pronounce foreign words correctly. I have a hard enough time with English. So yeah, they pretty much at the magazine they said the debate was kind of over. But I wanted to kind of still make a quick response because I do think there's a few things that Dr. Storck kind of gets misunderstandings, and I don't think it's necessarily his fault in some of this, because these essays, they're less than 2,000 words, and so we're talking about rather technical issues, and so there's bound to be misunderstanding and communication. So reflecting on it, I don't know how valuable necessarily these type of debates are when you have such little space to not only express your opinion but also respond to the other author. But anyways, I just kind of wanted to hop into this and clarify a few things. So the first thing is Dr. Storck suggests perhaps I didn't read his Communio essay, noting that he makes a fundamental error regarding the mutuum and loans in general. And this is probably just a technical point on my part that I didn't make clear enough. But the issue, because he goes on to say that he notes that there's a difference between, for example, a loan of things consumed in use and a loan or a rental of a car. And this is actually substantially the issue that I have with English, is that we have the word loan, which represents several different types of contracts. And so that's actually the substance of my argument. Now, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean that he was confusing money loans with leases, which is a distinction that I make as well. But rather that and he says this in his original article, like the mutuum is just money loans. And you can be more formal about that and say loans of things consumed in use in some way. But for me, that was just a miscommunication, and that was not something that I meant to suggest. And I have, in fact, read his Communio essay. It was one of the early essays that I read, and So the next kind of thing that we hop into is the he has 3 points that he wants to make. First one being the Montes Pietatis. Here he suggests that I beg the question, because I just assume that being a professional lender to obtain money to support your family is just as wrong. So I think this is a little unfair, because I did spend some time trying to explain why I thought his suggestion regarding a stipend of labor didn't work, because when we look at the issue of trade, the profit that the trader is getting that he would use to support his family is coming from these acts of commutative justice of buying and selling rather than, his labor as such. And so I think it really misses the point of what I actually said. So I think that's a bit unfair to suggest I was begging the question, because the issue for me and why I brought this up was and I say this specifically, the trader can't charge unjust prices in order to support his family. No matter how you want to suggest this stipend of labor, his profit is coming from buying at low prices and selling at high prices. That differential is his profit. That is what he's going to use to support his family. Now, if that profit is too small, he's not justified in selling at unjust prices to support his family. That would be the sense in which the trader would be doing something evil in order to achieve some good end, namely supporting his family. And I suggest the parallel with usury, that the usurer cannot take usury. He cannot make it a matter of the nature of the contract to exact something more merely so he can support his family. So there was quite a bit more that I argued there, and I laid out my argument of why I don't think the professional lender could demand profits even to support his family. And I think this really comes down to understanding the nature of the acts themselves and what is going on in that respect. Because it seems like Dr. Storck is suggesting that what justifies the profit, so the reason he is getting anything at all, is the labor. And this is quite confusing because that's not what provides the profit. The profit arises from this differential in the price. So, and if you look at the nature of the act itself, regardless of the end that makes the act desirable, it's the nature of the act that the trading generates profit. Now, you can desire the profit for itself, or you can desire the profit for some further virtuous end, as Aquinas suggests. But usury from the act itself does not justify the profit. So, yeah, that's kind of how I would phrase it. Yeah, and so he goes on to say that if I were right, then St. Thomas would have to insist that the Montes Pietatis was simply illicit. There are two issues with this. One is, and this may not be what Dr. Storck meant, but the Montes Pietatis did not come into existence until like the 15th or 16th centuries. So it was much later. It was probably at least 100 years after Aquinas that the Montes Pietatis began to form. So there's that, but then there's also the point that I very explicitly laid out that there was a difference between the Montes Pietatis and other types of loans. So to suggest that I am arguing that Aquinas would have to reject the Montes Pietatis is misleading. He doesn't exactly say that, but he suggests that if I was right, how does he phrase this? Mr. Humphreys assumes that St. Thomas thought that obtaining a just profit from the business of lending money was simply illicit, but that would seem to require that St. Thomas had seen the Montes themselves as illicit. and this cannot be done. So whether he's attributing that to me or not is not entirely clear. It seems to suggest that my possession at least implies that, but I explicitly lay out why I think the Montes Pietatis are engage in loans that cannot even be usurious. So I think that's at least it's a red herring because it doesn't actually address what I said. The other thing was on this point of the mutuum loan being a personally guaranteed. And he says, why does he think this since it is not explicitly mentioned in any Roman legal texts? Now, this is, in a sense, it's true, in a kind of pedantic sense, because, yeah, the Romans did not use the phrase personally guaranteed, but it's entirely uncontroversial that the mutuum gives rise to only one action to the lender, the condictio. And the condictio is an action whereby you can reclaim a specific sum of money, essentially. And this is all it gives rise to. And this is a in personam right or action. So the lender has only one action, to pursue the borrower personally for the principal. I actually got this point from Reinhard Zimmermann's The Law of Obligations. And this point about the condictio and the mutuum you can find in Book 12, Title 1 of Justinian's Digest, where it's discussed. So, strictly speaking, that's not true. Do they use the term personally guaranteed? No, but that's what in personam means. It's what a condictio is. And other authors I've read have, this isn't an issue. This isn't controversial to them. Like, Father Patrick clearly says, oh yeah, it's a personal guarantee. Another author I read was like, yeah, this is secured by person and profit, or person and property. So this is not really controversial that this is what the mutuum is. It's just, this is not the typical way that the mutuum is defined. And then he talks about, the church's authoritative texts. And I happily admit it's not explicitly in Vix Pervenit because, of course, Vix Pervenit is not the totality, and it's certainly not the comprehensive statement of the Church's magisterium on usury. It's like reading Humanae Vitae out of the whole context of everything that has ever been said about contraception in the entire tradition. Yes, Vix Pervenit is is the standout because it lays out the doctrine, but it's not like everything that could possibly be said about usury. But we'll get more of that a little bit later. Now, one thing that he does confuse here, he does confuse the issue of the pledge. So he notes that the value of the pledge can differ from time to time. And so it can secure the loan. And so he questions whether the contract changes depending on the pledge. And so if the value of the pledge is greater than the remaining loan amount, oh, well, it's not personally secured anymore because it's completely secured by the loan, or by the pledge, sorry. Whereas if it goes below, then it's actually secured, then it's personally secured because now the borrower has to cover any remaining amount. And so this is an error of confusing incidentals with essentials. And so the value of the pledge at any particular time is merely incidental to the nature of the contract. It's going to go up, it's going to go down. It's incidental to the nature of the contract. Now, the contract itself defines the terms. It defines the very nature of the contract. And so the mutuum is partially secured by the property. But irrespective of that, the lender will always have the condictio. He will always have this claim against the borrower for the return of his principal. And that's what makes it a mutuum. And the fact that this incidental up and down of the pledge doesn't change the nature or the terms of the agreement. Yeah, sure, if in default the value of the pledge is high, then yeah, the lender can recover his whole principal from the property. But that doesn't change the nature of the contract. The contract itself is personally secured. And the way you can kind of think about this is it's like, well, does getting a sunburn make you a different sort of thing because the color of your skin is now red? No. And then, you get over the sunburn and your color of your skin turns back to whatever it is. And are you a different, something of a different nature? So it's really confusing incidental changes with the essence of the contract here. Yeah, I think that's just kind of a basic mistake. But now kind of getting into the issue of where I get this idea of the personally secured loan from the magisterium. So he says, as for the census contract, while it is true that it figured in the debate of usury, it seems questionable to me to transfer the argument from the approval or condemnation of certain forms of that contract to the discussion of usury in a mutuum loan, especially because the early participants in the debate do not seem to have made a connection between these two different types of contract. Now, as I noted in my essay, him and I both agree that usury arises in the mutuum, and only in the mutuum. Hence, a contract for profit that is not usurious is necessarily not a mutuum. Also, conversely, or contrapositively, I don't know, a contract where usury is present is necessarily a mutuum. And this has to do with the nature of the moral object. Now, the nature of the moral object of usury, its matter is the matter of the moral object of usury is a mutuum loan that is necessary for it to be usurious. And so that's what I suggested was, well, if it is usurious, then it has to be a mutuum. And that is why the personal census is at least contains a mutuum, I should say. And the what was the other one? The triple contract also at least contains a mutuum. It makes no sense that they were condemned as usurious if they did not have a mutuum. Now, the way you could think about this is like the case of adultery. So part of the matter of the act of adultery is that one or more of the persons involved is married to someone else. And so for it to be an act of adultery, you have to have that enter into it. And so if you have two people who aren't married, you can't have adultery. Whereas if at least one of them is, you can. So in this sense, if you have usury, you have to have a mutuum. So that's my point. And the second thing is about these early participants. I don't know particularly how early he's talking about, but the later scholastics, like in the 16th century, I think, will explicitly say this. They will say, if there is usury present, then the mutuum must be present either virtually or formally. If the mutuum isn't there, it's not usury, no matter how unjust the contract is otherwise. And I think this was like Molina or De Lugo, one of those, who said this. And it's precisely because of this point that usury only arises in the mutuum. And the mutuum, it only arises in the mutuum. And so if there's usury present, it has to be a mutuum, at least virtually. And so this is my point. So, yeah. So there is a very clear connection. And that was the whole reason that the scholastics were trying to work out whether there was ownership was shifted or risk was shifted, because that is characteristic of the mutuum. And so when they were analyzing the census and analyzing the triple contract, they were looking for these characteristics of the mutuum because there had to be a mutuum in there if it was usurious. So that point is just strictly incorrect. Now the final thing to discuss is vix per vena and extrinsic contracts. So the issue here he has is that I note that in vix per venet, Benedict XIV explicitly does not deny that there are extrinsic titles, rather than positively affirming them. Storck's response is to say, this is certainly a strange assertion, since when someone says they do not deny something, it is commonly assumed that they not only admit its possibility, but in fact this is usually simply a polite way of affirming that something actually exists. Now, that may be true in ordinary, everyday conversation. I don't deny that. However, an encyclical is not ordinary, everyday conversation. First, Benedict XIV was himself a well-educated scholastic. He was used to writing in very precise ways. The committee that wrote the opinion he approved was composed of scholastics and canonists who were writing in very clear technical ways. They write very clearly, specifically the mutuum, and they used these specific forms of language to say these things. So it seems, and then also because it's an encyclical, because it's a point of the magisterium, is we should interpret it strictly for what it says and not for what it doesn't say. So yes, while in ordinary normal speech, it may be simply a polite way of affirming something, but as a matter of fact of what the document actually says, it doesn't affirm it. It simply does not deny it. So he then, of course, goes on to say that I shouldn't be reading into Pope Benedict XIV's word a meaning that is clearly not present, which I find somewhat ironic for that reason, because he wants to read into this "we do not deny" or "it is not denied" into meaning it is not denied, but it is actually affirmed. So there's that. The other thing is he cites the Latin of the word, and he says, and if we look at the Latin of the encyclical, we see that its wording is at least equally forceful, for it states, and then he gives the Latin quote. Now, unfortunately, he leaves out a key word in an ellipsis. So what he has is essentially, it is not denied that there can be with a mutuum something else, other titles, concur, can occur. Now, what he leaves out there is the Latin word forte, which means by chance. So not only is he saying that it is not denied, but he's also saying, by chance it may occur. So it's much less forceful than he presents with the Latin or claims. It is actually much more tentative, because later on in the encyclical he'll actually explicitly deny that there is a title always present. So the tentative nature of the extrinsic titles is much greater than Storck admits. So so those are kind of the main points I kind of wanted to cover. This was longer than I expected, so but yeah, I really appreciated the discussion with Dr. Storck. And in these debates, there's especially with how short these are, and we're both writing in English, and then it's getting translated into Spanish, and then probably having to translate it back into English. So it's not surprising that there's some disagreement and confusion about even very basic things. So, but yeah, I still think that Dr. Storck is mistaken. I think he ignores significant portions of my arguments, and leaves some things still very well unjustified. And then he also, I don't think he understands Roman law or contracts or some of that stuff. So but yeah, and I have nothing but respect for Dr. Storck. He's written a lot about Catholic social teaching for many years, and I even have, I think, a couple of his books. So I really appreciate him engaging with me. I tend to think of myself as nobody. And so the fact that anyone wants to debate or discuss with me is often surprising to me. So, but yeah, thank you for listening. You can check out that essay. I'll leave a link in the show notes, and you can. I'll probably link to all the different essays going back and forth. So, but yeah, thank you for your time, and have a good day. Have a happy Holy Week, and I'll see you on the other side of Easter. All right, bye.